Hello and welcome to ArtShow. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me Anne Eder. Hi, Anne. How are you?
Good. How are you, Craig?
Good. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
It depends on which branch of the family you talk to, but it's fine.
Okay. So the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to flip over and share some work of yours to give the people who have never seen your work some idea of the kind of things that you do.
Okay.
So I went on your website and I selected pieces that really kind of caught my eye. And this was the first one that I saw that I really had some questions about because I know that you do more than just photography. You also incorporate sound and video in some of your works. And I think this one is part of that.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So tell me a little bit about this piece.
Okay. Well, most of the time I'm building everything that goes into my frame. So
Okay.
basically, I'm building these large sculptural pieces, and their first services as public art.
Hmm.
And then I take those and the components become part of my image making. So this is actually a large scale sculpture out in the trees. And this is actually down near Fenway Park in Boston in the Riverway Park area.
Hmm.
It's one of three cocoons, large cocoons at that for that particular installation. And it's made entirely of natural materials. It's, made from mulberry branches and alpaca hair and, various things. It was also great because the birds were sort of stealing bits of it to make their nest. So
That's
a lot of really goth little bird nests out there that's for that particular season. But
so
and
do you still have this?
that is actually at Halide Project right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the show at Halide Project. I took it down from Riverway. It made its way out to my boneyard, and then from
Okay.
the over to Halide. So, and it does.
Nice.
This one does have sound. Some have light, some have sound. This is a sound piece. So.
Sound piece. And who does the sound? Do you do it?
It's yeah, I mean, this one has actual physical things inside it that make sound. So it's, I mean, they really vary. And a lot of times I use solar power to, do things. But in this case, it's physical and it sounds when the wind blows it, or in the case of being indoors, if someone brushes against it, so.
That's interesting. And then, of course, this piece. So this this guy, this creature that you've fabricated, and I saw multiple photos where you've posed him in different ways throughout the forest.
Yes.
So I assume like he's the artwork, but the photograph is also an artwork as well.
Right. So
Okay.
each one of these guys that I create, and they're large. Okay, so this is probably 10 feet tall or so.
Yeah.
Um, each one of them have a fully posable infrastructure that I build so that they are able to be manipulated into different, positions and expressions and what have you. All of it is meant to biodegrade back into the earth.
Hmm.
At this point, this creature, if I were to show you a picture today, which is about 6 years, you can almost not tell it was there.
Well, I love this particular photo. I really love because he's posed, just so perfectly that he blends in, but he doesn't blend in. But for me, you know, seeing artwork that does have a sense of whimsy and humor in it, to me, it's so rare anymore just to see that kind of stuff.
I know.
And it's so pleasant to see because it puts me at ease as soon as I saw this. So I got to ask you, when you were taking this piece and posing him around, did you have a nickname for this guy? That's a stupid question, but
This creature has a name. This creature's name is Quick Black.
okay.
And this is actually the very earliest design of the creatures that I build. And so this one has become like the sort of prototype and
Hmm.
ancestor of all the ones that come down from there. And then each one that I build has a little piece of the one before it. So
Hmm.
it's like this ongoing sort of tribe with bits of,
Hmm.
creatures built in. But they're all meant to sort of go through an entropic phase, where they just eventually decompose. So
Yeah. Well, I want to see more of this guy. I would love to see a book about his
I
adventures
have
or
a
just
book about the adventures.
right. So then I also came across this piece in particular, but so you're still kind of using that figure, correct? But you're almost like doing a separate portrait of him.
Well, yeah, it's the same tribe, but it's actually a fully built new construction, just with like a bit of the old one in there somewhere.
Hmm.
This is done on a different process as far as printing goes. I've printed them in a lot of different processes. Okay, so this one is done in gum bichromate, which
Done
is
by chromate, yeah. I was
antique.
I was wondering with the blues there and everything. So
Um,
so how do you use how do you get the original image to begin with? How big is your negative that you're working with? This
the same size as my finished piece, so
okay,
it's contact based. Yeah.
yeah. This one again with the whimsy in this, I think is just it's fantastic. I mean,
And
I take it seriously, but it has that element in it that just gives me a little bit of a joy to it.
yeah, we can talk about seriousness in art at some point, boys.
Right. So this is a piece much more serious, except for the title. I love what was the title of this?
This is the hat of protection.
Hat of protection. That is awesome. I love that.
And
So, and who's the model that we're looking at?
this is a friend's son who's now older, but it's amazing how fast they grow. I shot these kids, and then 5 years later they're like teenagers and look like adults and everything. But at any rate, I built the hat and all of that, and also I built a sort of vest of bone for this one. So that in some of the images I have that in there too. This is actually a platinum palladium print of that.
Mm-hmm.
The show at Halide right now, basically, I decided it's mostly the creatures, and I wanted to document them in plant material from the site where they were situated. So all the prints are made using a 19th century process called anthotype,
Mm-hmm.
which creates an image strictly out of plant juice. Like you make an
Right.
emulsion, and they're all printed in skunk cabbage.
Now I've seen this one also that had color in it as well.
Yeah, they've all been through some iterations. I think as an artist, it takes time. You sort of go through different processes to find the right language for an image. So part of that is what happens. So
So I'm curious with the way that you approach photography, you're not editioning these, correct? They're really just one-offs, like monotypes.
if they're in an archival process like this, like Platinum, I do audition them.
Okay.
Um, I can't sell the ephemeral pieces per se, although again, ephemerality is another discussion. Galleries are becoming a little more comfortable with it. And I've realized over time that I have little desire to add to the glut of commodities on the market.
Boy, we have another conversation coming up because I totally agree with you.
I feel like artists should be paid as a service, so
And
this
this
one is
one,
platinum palladium again, and I can art, I have like a editioned, series for this. So.
so I assume this one, the scale of this looks like it's rather smallish.
It's about 1114,
Yeah.
As a finished print. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great photo. I mean, the balance of it, the secret geometry in it, it's wonderful. And then last but not least, is this another one of your crew?
This one is actually the daughter of a very well-known curator, and I won't tell her name because
Okay. No. Get it. Yeah.
But she asked me to do a portrait on her daughter's 7th birthday. And this is what I came up with. And it was very collaborative, like I made all these things for her to play with and interact with, and just have a completely feral day in the woods of, being magical.
Yeah.
And this is platinum palladium, and it's one of the portraits I think I'm happiest with that I've made over time. I do feel like it captured a side of her that isn't immediately obvious, but also really, compelling. So I'm happy.
I really think it's an extraordinary photograph. And I'm curious, which woods is this?
That one is sort of in the outskirts of Boston. It's called the Fells.
Okay. It looks very old.
There are a lot of old trees out there. I mean, being in Massachusetts, I'm surrounded with green space and conservation areas. So there's a lot of old woods, which is perfect for me.
Interesting. So let me start where I love to start in the beginnings. Tell me a little bit about do you remember your first exposure to art as a little kid? Was there anything that just sort of at first bowled you over?
I think probably my first exposure was to illustrators.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was like, and I actually consider myself to be an illustrator more than a photographer.
Why do you do that? Is it because of your storyline?
I'm very narrative, in the things and I'm very inspired by narrative when I shoot, so I feel like I'd be perfectly content to be illustrating books, you know. But I think that's my first, like my background is kind of crazy. My family's from like Appalachia,
Okay.
and my access to nearly everything to do with the arts world was very limited. So I think my first experience was bookmobiles, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, and borrowing and reading every possible book, and I loved the illustrators, especially the old children's book illustrators. It's just so crazy. And then also family photographs and that sort of thing were huge. You know, I loved those comic books. You know, I mean, really, I think most of my initial exposure was illustration.
It's wonderful to hear these kind of things because it often sort of puts a new light on the kind of work that we're looking at. You know, the idea when you talked about family, you know, those photographs, they do appear to be part of your family. You know, even that your created creatures are a handmade family.
Yeah.
So take me forward a little bit. At what point did you realize that you were going to go into the arts? At what point did you decide I'm going to be an artist?
I
When did
think
that happen?
basically Inception.
Okay.
Self-identified as an artist for most of my life.
Interesting.
And you know, I can't tell you why, you know, but I think I came out just being like, yeah, that's my thing, that's my jam.
And
And it really started mainly for me, you know, in terms of production, started with photo. A relative gave me an old like Kodak Brownie camera when I was 8 years old. So I was
okay,
shooting medium format, medium format at 8,
that's
and I
fantastic.
shot everything. I mean, I had that thing with me all the time, and I think in a lot of ways it was how I mediated some very dark circumstances, you know. So, brain quiet. Sorry, dog.
I got one too. Yeah. No, that was actually going to be one of my next questions. Was, you know, when did you get your first camera? Did you carry it around everywhere?
Everywhere. I had it with me. I was constantly bothering people sticking my camera in their face, you know, and I took pictures of everything, you know, like anything I saw that was interesting. I was always interested in nature and the natural world. I was out shooting in the woods and shooting, you know, whatever was day to day, you know, whatever was going on. So
So what equipment are you currently using?
I use a mixed bag. I shoot both digital and film.
Uh-huh.
If I shoot film, I prefer medium format. It's easy to carry around. I don't. I mean, large format is great, but for me, I want a little more mobility. So I usually will shoot with like a Pentax 67 or a good digital camera, and then everything from there on becomes geared towards a material product, like a physical photograph.
So I'm curious a little bit about, you know, you use these processes that are really now considered sort of old school processes,
Oh, yeah.
these palladium prints, gum bichromates, those sorts of things. Who taught you these processes? Who lit this fire under you?
Okay, so I have to go back a little bit because I think I went through this kind of crisis at some point. Like, you know, when digital came on and I was like, all the old school stuff's going to disappear. And it really started to, in a way, like, like Ilford and Kodak were losing their shirts, you know, they weren't able to sell stuff for analog darkroom. And so I ended up doing this in-depth paper on like the disappearing materiality of photographs and craftsmanship. And at the same time, I kind of went through an ethical crisis of shooting documentary and street, where I just felt uncomfortable about doing that to people anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
I actually took a year and didn't shoot anything
Mm-hmm.
at that point. And then when it came back to it, I started constructing all my photos. You know, at first I started doing collaborative work with people, and then I eventually just moved to almost total construction of anything
Right.
I shoot. You know.
So since we live in a digital age, what is it about those methodologies, those older methods of image making? What is it that attracts you to it?
Again, like I said, I prefer to have a physical form. Like
Okay.
I mean, you know, if you want to go back to like Walter Benjamin, you know, and all of that, you can talk about aura, you can talk about, you know, experiencing a work of art with more than one sense. Like if you're experiencing a work of art on the screen like this, it's limited to visual pretty much, you know. Whereas if you're experiencing a piece of art in person, you can touch it, you can examine it, you can smell, everything to do with your surroundings is part of your experience too. So
You incorporate, or do you feel that you incorporate performance as part of your works? Is
um
the
I mean, I think some of them are performative. I actually did performance for a long time too, back,
Okay.
before, sort of moved away from it. But
I don't mean like performance as in like with an audience, but even just the act of making it. There's it's like a play that's put
right,
out in front of you.
there is.
Okay.
Then in the viewing of it too, because as opposed to most gallery shows, mine are like, please touch.
Mhm.
I want people to touch things. I want people to smell things. Like one of the things that made me happiest with the show at Halide right now is people would walk in the room and go, "It smells like the woods in here,"
That's fantastic.
So
That's
there was,
success. I
yeah,
like that.
what I wanted.
So how does your creative process work? When you're going to make something, do the ideas for the image happen first and then you work towards it, or do you rely more on, say, experimentation and creativity in the moment? Or is it a combination of both?
Well, combination, but I'm definitely a process person.
Are you?
I think I was making those monsters for 5 years before I understood why I was making them. I
That
mean,
makes sense.
maybe I'm
They
the
look old to begin with, so I could.
so yeah, I'm definitely process driven.
That's fantastic. I mean, that tells me a lot about, when I look at your works, what they may mean, sort of knowing that rather than it's, oh, these are my dreams kind of a thing.
Yeah, no,
Um,
definitely more like, oh, this piece of wood is telling me
right.
something that I need to make.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the creative process and how that has changed over the years. So I saw other works on your website that were, the older works that were very, very different, I would
Very
say.
different, yeah.
A lot more graphic-y kind of a thing. And there's a lot more, I think there's a lot more nuance in the works that you're currently creating now. Over the years, did you see this as more of a gradual change into that, or were there times when you just made breaks, like nope, I'm going to leave everything behind? Well, how was it for you?
Hey, I feel like even though it doesn't seem like it to look at the pieces, there is a continuum. Okay.
Okay.
So there are certain things that I've been making for as long as I can remember that just sort of come and go in the course of my practice.
Mm.
You know, and every now and then I sort of do a self exercise where I determine whether something still feels authentic to me. You
Okay.
know, I encourage my students to do these pechakuchas where they give me 10 slides, 10 seconds to explain of what sort of has driven their aesthetics or their desire to make, and that sort of thing. And I do it for myself frequently just to see if the same things are still, resonant for me or if they've changed. So I can say that, there are many things that have carried over from day one to like day, thousand, whatever. So.
Well, I kind of guessed that when early on you told me that the some of the creatures that you made are made of older creatures that sort of reinventing them. So I mean, to me that was kind of a sign as to what you were doing. When you make your works, if you can step back, do you consider them to be somewhat autobiographical in nature, or is it not? Are you not that close to it?
No, I think I'm very close to it. I think they're very much connected to my own childhood in the woods. Um,
Interesting.
I think that my experience of the woods was as a safe haven from a lot of darker things that were going on in my childhood. And I think that my monsters are they're my teeth and claws. And I didn't realize that for a long time, but I think that they are. You know,
Okay,
so
it makes sense now.
okay.
So speaking of teeth and claws, where do you go about finding the subjects? Because I saw you had a series where it was almost, one was a photograph of teeth and one was a photograph of claws, so they were just sort of similar. Where do you go about finding these specimens?
Well, in the case of teeth, I made them. They're porcelain.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Uh,
commitment.
yeah. And I made thousands of them, trust me.
Okay.
I mean, when I get onto something, sometimes it's a lot of iterations.
All right. Do you have
So
a teeth making machine? Like,
they're everyone made by hand. Yeah, and they're generally high fired porcelain. They're either glazed or unglazed, and then other things in the installation work that I do are also some made from porcelain, some made out of wood, some made from other natural materials, but most of it is made sometimes with like claws. I mean, I find plant materials that work great for this, you know what I mean? So I'm not making those per se, right?
Um, it just got my head sort of spinning thinking about all of those processes.
Yes, I'm very
Uh,
busy.
yeah, I guess so. The mediums that you work with, so I noticed that the majority of the images do seem to be on paper. Is that correct?
For the
Or the
image making, yeah. I mean, I've done some printing on bones, I've done some printing on other things, but in general, they're kind of separate. I mean, the sculptural work is meant to function as components for the images. So I would say there's an equal amount of sculptural work, but that it's not so much that I'm combining the two. Like I'm not printing on those. Although I will say that one of the reasons I got into ceramics at all was because I wanted to do ceramic infrastructures for the creatures so that when they decomposed, another sculpture will emerge. So,
that's fantastic.
so
I
that's
like that.
that's to come, hopefully.
So I noticed that on your website you had things that were separated by, for lack of a better word, series.
Mm.
Do you think in terms of series, or does it come afterwards? Like, oh, these all belong together?
Well, I would say a little bit of both. Sometimes I have an idea for a series, and like I said, all my work is kind of connected, and it's all connected through my feelings about the natural world for the most part. So you've got something like the Tales from the Fells stuff, and then you've got the Mysteries of Plum Island, which looks very different, but I'm making the same kind of physical connections to the natural world. Like
That's
basically
true.
for the Plum Islands, I was soaking my paper in seawater and
Mhm.
then silver nitrate to do my salted silver prints using seawater from the site. And it's not a literal documentary. It's a
Yeah,
fiction actual documentary.
yeah, I saw that, and that I'm glad that you had that narrative at the top because it changed my understanding of the pictures I was looking at. Um, so if you do work in different series, do those series ever overlap, or are you one at a time kind of a person?
No, I mean, I'm generally working on multiple things at the same time. Like right now, I have lots of new work sort of. It's like swirling plates, I don't know what's going to get done first. I mean, one thing that did cross over was the ghosts were sort of separate from everything else. And then I felt like they were connected enough to the woods and the monsters to work together. So they've been being exhibited together right now. So.
Do you ever do you ever considered anything finished, and or do you go back
I
if
go
you
back, I mean, there are some things that maybe I won't go back to because I've, kind of moved on or whatever, but I don't know if any series is ever completely finished in my mind, I mean, there's always another image waiting out
yeah,
there.
I hear that a lot. So I'm curious about that. When you're making your work, say you're in your studio and you're making something, I'm curious to know how much do your audiences ever come into your mind while you're in the process of creating, or do you not worry about that, or do you not think about that?
Okay, I don't worry about it, but in part it's because the ways that I'm constructing my work are kind of based on our sort of cultural archives of stories. So I feel like people already have an entrance. And in grad school, I will say I got a lot of crap about it because they were like, "Why are you making work for children?" I'm like, "Well, it's not really just for children, you know." And I feel like if kids have access on one level, that's great, and if adults access it on a different level, that's also great.
Yeah,
So kind of where I'm at with that. Um,
I I have the same actually response. So like I just did an art fair last week, and the ones I got so excited about were the children who would walk up and start pointing about stuff, and they were
I
the entryway for the
love when they're
adults.
not looking at the installation works, I mean, just like the feedback is so immediate. And, I build these books that I leave on site too. And I encourage people to leave me stories and drawings and poems and whatever. And they're always a delight for me afterwards. Like just page after page of people, adults and kids, leaving me messages, stories, drawings, poems, and, so great.
That's absolutely wonderful. In our your studio, I assume you have a dedicated studio space.
I actually have live workspace, and so I'm
Okay.
I'm in the artist studios out in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is we have 60 live workspaces here, and then there are like over 300 studio spaces in the adjoining buildings, old mill buildings.
How often are you in your studio?
Oh, I mean, one of the things I always tell my students is like you got to show up like every day. It,
Okay.
it's the job, you got to show up, and you might make nothing you like that day and throw it all out, but you got to make something. So.
Do you ever spend time in your studio and you make absolutely nothing?
Oh, yeah, because I mean, I think artists need downtime to hear what's coming up. I mean, there's sometimes when you just have to be quiet and listen to what's, bubbling up in terms of ideas. But, also I'm out of the studio teaching a lot, and things like that. So
Are you for the ideas that you get, obviously you have a direct connection to nature, but I'm also kind of curious, are there other artists out there that you are maybe sort of you get inspiration from or an idea from or steal something from? Or is it for you is it all about nature?
I would say there's enough there that I don't need to get, to borrow from someone else. But there are plenty of people making amazing work out there. But I always feel like, I don't know, I'm so far out of the zeitgeist. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like
Are you?
I feel like I am,
Oh
like,
no, I think you're dead in the middle of it now.
I feel like at least when I started working this way, I was very far out of the zeitgeist. And so, I feel like why would anybody, copy me? Is, it's not like I'm doing things that are, I'm not overtly political, I'm not
Yeah,
serious.
yeah,
We talked about, I mean, I am serious, but in a different way, you
yeah.
know, so, I don't know. I feel like, and especially in photography, I feel like it's hard to make work that isn't political right now and have people think that it's valid work or, timely.
I know what you said, and the only reason I disagree with you is I see so many artists, and I look at so many that what I see coming down the pike in terms of the artists that we have now as the future art history, I don't think it's what people think it is. I think there's a lot of political noise in the arts, but I also think it's very short-sighted. I mean, I don't see that stuff as influencing the next generation. I could be wrong. I probably am wrong, but you never know.
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm probably wrong too, but
Yeah.
the thing that I think is, when I don't, I'm personally not interested in art that tells me what to think.
Uh-huh.
Like I would rather look at art that makes me ask a question,
Yeah,
or,
exactly.
if something is telling me this is what you should be thinking because this is politically
Right.
correct, or this is, it's like with the environment, I'm obviously concerned with that. But my approach to it isn't like, to hit people over the head and be like doom and gloom or killing off our earth. It's more like give people a reason to become engaged with it so that they want to take care of it,
That's
so
why I
that.
say that because I know more artists that are like that than there are that are flatter ones, and also it's a different kind of an audience that you're really speaking with too. I think your audience is a lot more engaged. They'll be around for a lot longer, whereas there's not too many artists that are still like, let's make anti-Nixon paintings or anything like that. They've sort of
I
died off.
still see a lot of of stuff that's centered in politics from a strictly photographic point of view anyway. But I mean, I'm interdisciplinary. I've always been interdisciplinary, and my audience is generally like, yeah, they may see it in galleries, but I would say the vast majority of people aren't seeing it in galleries. They're seeing it in the woods, or they're seeing
Yeah.
it somewhere else. So.
That's why I like your work so much. It really does make a lot of connections for different audiences.
Yeah, it means
So
a lot.
I have time for just one more question. Uh, my favorite question to ask artists, real simple. What does making art do for you?
I feel like I'm like a shark. I gotta create to breathe. If I stop moving, it's all over. So
Okay.
it's like I have to do it. And I feel like I have to do it no matter what I'm doing in terms of work. Like if I'm doing a job, that has to be creative too. You know what I mean? Or I'll make it that way, you know?
Yes,
It's
I
like
totally.
it's how I exist in the world. So it's sort of what I have to do.
That is like breathing. Yeah. I totally agree. Well, now that I know a little bit more about your work, especially your beginnings, I have to go back and look again to see some of these works. I think they're quite fantastic, and I was thrilled to come across your website and really see all the works. So,
Well, it needs updating really badly. So if you want to see the
well, they
previous,
always.
go to Instagram.
So, I want to thank you so much for coming by today and talking to me. I really, really appreciate it. And I also want to thank everybody else who's tuned in to watch Anne and I's conversation today. Of course, we encourage you to like, share, and subscribe because that helps more people see these videos. And so thank you very much for watching. And again, Anne, thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. I
Thanks so
appreciate
much.
it. All right. Take care, everyone.